Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ammaar. I will be chairing this year's crisis committee called The Uprising of the Chinese Communist Party, 1934. This video, Crisis Cabinets 101, is designed to probably prepare you and enhance your knowledge if you have already been doing crisis committees. We'll go over the structure of private directives, public directives, what directives are, the thought processes that you need to involve, the mistakes that ideally you make, and generally everything that you need to do well in a good committee. So let's begin. The first thing that we will be covering is going to be private directives. So ideally, what private directives are, right? So in Pakistan, we call them private directives. Internationally, they are called crisis notes. And private directives are basically everything that you have to do with your portfolio powers. They could not only be restricted to your own confidants or people who come under your control, but they can also be about, they can be they refer to everyone outside the delegates, right? So anyone throughout the world or the country that your committee is set up in. It covers, enhances everything that you need: letters, particular actions, military orders, everything, every action that you need to take comes under the ambit of directives, right? So let's start with structure, right? Because I don't intend for this to be a very basic one, so I'd be moving down towards the technicalities. So the structure, ideally, you need to start with whoever you're addressing this to. If it's you just someone who comes under your portfolio powers, just write. I usually prefer just writing confidants. You can give a particular name as well. That doesn't really matter. If it's to an external personality, just write their name or their position, and then let's start. So ideally, if it's to your confidant, you don't need to add anything, just straightforward. It's because you have power over them, so you directly go ahead and give them an order. But if you're writing to an external personality, you want this letter to be, or you want this directive to feel realistic, right? Because in the entire ambit of a crisis committee is to give delegates an experience of how real world politics or how real world decision making works. So ideally start with some personal introduction or something that connects you with the personality, and then after that, just if it's your confidant, you go directly towards giving whatever order you have, whatever you need to do in a step-by-step process. If that's not the case, if you're writing a letter particularly to an external personality, then you need to probably, the most important thing that I feel is missed out in a lot of crisis delegates, the reason directives are rejected are because you guys fail to mention or give incentives, right? Incentives are very important because if you look at the way real world politics works as well, you need to give something to get something in return. So make sure that if you're, for example, I am in negotiations with CIA, right? And I am the leader or a particular personality of a imaginary country, then I need to give some incentives to the CIA in order to work with me, right? Because they need to have some gains as well. Or if I'm, for example, in negotiations with a military leader of an enemy army, then I need to offer him some incentives as well, right? So, for example, you can go on and say that if this is successful, or if you succeed in ensuring this happens, I promise you this territory or this province. So it ideally gives them a reason as well. Now, the most important part when it comes to crisis directives, just make them precise, right? We don't want 5 pages long with maps and everything drawn in, no, because the crisis staff themselves have a lot of, given if it's a particularly an experienced committee with a lot of experienced delegates, then the crisis staff itself has a lot of directives coming in. So make them as precise as possible. Write down the exact steps you want one by one, right? So lay them, structure them down, and remember, everything does not have to be covered under one directive, right? So one crisis directive should not cover everything. It's much better if you lay down your plans step by step, even if it takes 2 to 3 directives, right? So you send one directive, or if you're in a hurry, you have already written all of them together, then you can probably even send 2 or 3 directives together, right? Naming them 1, 2, 3, or however it works, right? So this happens first, then this, right? So it's exceptionally important that you ensure that you have break down the directives and give the exact clear steps the way they will happen in reality. Because another major reason many crisis directives are rejected are because you overstep your boundaries, right? So you are the minister of war, and you are asking for the commander of the United States Army to be assassinated. That does not add up, right? So how will you do that? And that's where the steps come in. So now I think I will go about right. So I will go about and give you guys an example of what ideally is a good private directive. So uh, if you would read this, so this is to the confidant. The first two lines are just basic general information that it just makes your directive look good, right? So the quality of directives looks good, because when the crisis staff is seeing every session 300 or 200 directives, a personal touch, or the way you write, the way you phrase it, makes them stand out, right? So it seems interesting to the crisis staff as well. Now, if you would read here, I give the exact steps that are required. Right? Number one, get into contact with the opposition newspaper editors in the country. Number two, force them to start writing in favor of the Minister of War. Number three, give them the leak that the Ministry of War has conducted a successful operation, which has dealt a severe blow to the terrorists. And then number four is the entire purpose of this directive. Now, there are 4 steps in this directive. I would like you guys to point out what is the mistake that I have made in this directive. I'd like you guys to probably pause this video for 2 seconds and find out within these 4 directives steps, what is the mistake. Right, so I hope you tried. The mistake is, in the end, you must ensure that the popularity, right? Ideally, what I prefer is to never ever openly declare what my entire game plan or what my strategy is, right? So if I'm the crisis staff and I'm receiving this, I automatically know that if I want the popularity of the Minister of War to increase, there are 2 things that I want. One, it's something that I want from him, which is why I'm helping him indirectly through my portfolio powers. Or number 2, I'm trying to trap him in the future. So the future directives that I will be sending out will be geared towards trapping, right? So I've made sure that the crisis staff already knows what I'm thinking, and that makes it much, much easier for them to counter and further pressurize you. So ideally, the best crisis delegate would be someone whose directives are not only troubling everyone in the committee and solving the crisis, but are also constantly challenging the crisis staff with new and innovative ways to challenge that particular delegate. Right, so it should be a battle with the crisis staff as well. They should also feel challenged that yes, the quality is so good that we are feeling hard how to further pressure or how to further counter this individual delegate. As I talked about how we need to increase the directives, how you need to lay down the steps one by one. So now if you would go on to directive number 2, now this is a follow-up to the previous directive. We are assuming that the first directive has passed. Again, to the confidant, now that the opposition newspapers are in favor of the Minister of War, forge a letter stating that the president has decided to hold negotiations with the terrorists, forge the signature of the personal secretary of the president, and drop this letter onto one of the editor's house. Simultaneously, hire a rogue of teenagers, tell them to start putting up news, and then claiming war, so further increasing the popularity, and then in the end, but make sure that there's no link whatsoever. Kill the teenagers once the work is done. So there's a lot of work in this, a very, very simple directive. The reason is, the first thing is that the reason we are forging a letter is that we are trying to strike 2 birds with a stone. So I'm not going to just give you a particular mind process that I had when I was writing this directive for the video, because if you're forging the seal of the personal secretary, the idea that would spring up in your mind is that probably I'm trying to frame him for all of this, and then and then blame this all on him. But that's I feel is very simple. So what I would ideally do is probably use this further to bargain with the personal secretary, get closer to him, or start taking out probably, I won't use the word blackmail, but then probably influence his decisions to further my own goal. So that's one thing. The other thing that is, so it opens up a lot of opportunities for you. The problem in this directive is that I haven't mentioned how is it possible for me to forge the signature of the personal secretary, right? So this is a very important a mistake in this, which ideally, if it's a very good crisis staff, they should reject this directive, because I've not given how is it possible for me to forge the personal signature of the personal secretary. Uh, that's one thing. Number two, the reason I've hired a group of rogue teenagers until is because there is ideally no contact between teenagers and the propaganda ministry. I'm assuming I'm the minister of propaganda, and the most important part is covering your steps, right? So ideally, a lot of crisis delegates make a big mistake of not covering their steps, and that bites you back, either in the form of crisis staff, because you're giving them an opening to further pressurize you, or to it's just a weakness in your directive, right? So if you're thinking, always think your directives from the perspective of real world, how would things work there. And it's a very weak move to not cover your directives over here, because if there's any a wise or a good experienced delegate, he would simply, if it's the intelligence minister, for example, he would just go on and say that who's putting up these posters of the minister of war, and then the crisis staff will probably just go on and say that these are the teenagers. He'd probably send another directive saying, all right, bring these teenagers in for the questioning, and then obviously the crisis staff will tell them that the propaganda minister is behind them. So that's why killing the teenagers ensures that there is no trace left. That is one thing. You can even probably put a letter saying, or you can probably even use this further, but that's something up to your prerogative, right? So this is the ideal way that you build up your directives. My thought process behind this is that the reason I'm passing this directive, my long-term end goal is to trap the Minister of War, frame him for being having much more support than the president. So I would ideally not be the one. So if I'm the propaganda minister, there's one strategy directly, sending out negative propaganda against the Minister of War, blaming his failures and so on. But no, I feel that increasing his support is much better, because then he's happy, he's thinking he's doing well, because it's the crisis staff who's giving him this support, who's applauding his good work in the committee, but it's actually you, and the president should feel insecure because it's the Minister of War who's being labeled as the savior. So in the end, I would probably then go on and try to influence the president that, this guy's a direct threat to your power, and as much as we like efficient ministers, he must be overstepping his ambit or his authority. So that's one way. But you could have a lot of other opportunities with this. If like, there's a vast area of the way you can build this up further on, and that's why I thought of how you would like to take this on forward. Right. So now that I've showed you an example of private directives, let's move on to joint private directives. I feel joint private directives are the most important when it comes to particularly unmods or breaks or whatever you term them in your crisis committee. They're written the exact same way. They ideally aren't addressed to your confidants. If they're addressed to an external personality, then definitely you write who you're addressing to. But the nature of joint private directives are collectively at least two or more than two delegates coming together and pooling their resources, pooling their portfolio powers to carry out a particular action that you cannot carry out on your own, right? There are few things that you need to be very careful of when it comes to joint private directives. Number one, who's writing them, because the way they're worded is extremely important, and I'll show you that when we move on to when I show you the example of the joint private directive I've written. And number two, who's exactly benefiting the most. The third thing is that it allows you to connect a lot with other delegates in the committee, right? So if you're sending out joint private directives, you probably get an idea of what their thinking is, how they're thinking. If you're very smart, or if you could probably get an idea of what their strategy is. There's a vast array of opportunities. There's a vast array of different things that you can do. with joint private directives. But the biggest one is that it allows you to connect with delegates and it allows you to see their thought processes as well. It also allows you to carry out things that you probably wouldn't be able to uh, ideally do on your own. And if you're wise, you can use these joint private directives against other delegates. I'll show you how. So when it comes to structure, still same. There will be no to confidant. You don't ideally address it. When you're writing them down, you just go on basically explaining exactly what the plan is, what the portfolio powers will be doing. So here, the Minister of Propaganda and the Chief of Army Staff are writing. The Propaganda Ministry will select a deserted town. Just if you will just pause this video, I'll move on and read this read this joint private directive. So now I'm hoping that you have read it. There are a few things here, right? So if you read it, you have seen how it's structured. There is a clear step-by-step approach. There's nothing extra. There's direct. You have it's clearly explaining what the location is, where the people are coming from, the squadrons are coming from the Chief of Army Staff. The Propaganda Ministry will be filming this entire operation. So you get a basic idea of how to write this. Now, the biggest the biggest thing that I want you guys to take from this joint private directive is that it is increasingly beneficial for the Minister of Propaganda, but it's very, 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 very bad for the Chief of Army Staff, and they should never be accepting this. Why? Because if you will read this, the troops that are being killed are actually from the Chief of Army Staff, and this battle is actually having real casualties, right? So it's been, and this entire battle is also being captured on tape by the Minister of Propaganda. So in the future, if I'm the Minister of Propaganda, I can very easily go on and say that the terrorists who we actually tried to kill, who we showed that were being killed, were actually troops from the Chief of Army Staff's forces, and he's actually killing his own troops. So how can we trust him in guarding the future nation? And there's a lot of other things that you can do with this, but you see how you've trapped the Chief of Army Staff just through this one joint private directive. And if you're thinking how we are not being blamed for this, we can simply say that we are providing this. We were informed that the battle was taking place, and then you need to obviously guard your steps as well a bit. So, but ideally, it's the Chief of Army Staff who will be suffering in this particular joint private directive. So that's how you can use joint private directives to your own benefit. I hope you guys understand how to write private directives, joint private directives. Now, public directives are very simple. There's no particular order. There's no particular structure. They act as ideally what I would term the draft resolutions of a particular session. They probably, I don't think, unless you have a very big major crisis that's going on for 2 sessions or so on, but they ideally are intended to solve a major crisis, or maybe the chair can even ask you to solve it for smaller crises as well. You can ask public directives, they can ask public directives. The structure is straight, right? Just exactly write down step by step the way you do it in public or private directives, but this time it's everyone coming together. So it's a much more formal tone. You just write down who's doing what actions are you taking. You can write in pointers form. It does not really matter. Some committee directors require authors for public directives. If that is true, it is ideally that you should be the author of some of the public directives at the very least, because I understand there are some people who prefer just sitting and writing their own private directives during unmoderated caucuses, but you should always participate because this is also important. This is geared towards solving the crisis, and solving the crisis is overtly what your responsibility is as ministers or as any personalities within the cabinet. So yeah, so if you will just read this, who's going to do what, where the actions, just the basic info. Make sure you're author for some. Do not write a lot of public directives. You don't want to be seen as, this is probably the only area because it involves a much more general theme of model UN. that you can come off as being a bit more aggressive than is required, or a bit more try hard, would be the phrase. So just be careful here. It's not really required for you to be the author for every public directive or ensure that every public directive passes, but there should be some amount of public directives that you're passing. Right. So now let's talk about the thought processes behind directives. Right. So what you need, what should be the thinking process. So the first thing that once I'm sorry. Right. So the first thing you need to ensure is long-term versus short-term strategy. The short-term strategy is ideally limited to the crisis at hand. So the session, the major crisis that you have. Long-term strategy is your end goal that you've probably prepared for before the committee come. You've come in. It's developed as the committee has proceeded, but it's the ideally what you want in on the last session of the third day, or on the last or on the fourth day first session. It's what you have culminated your uh, entire 3 days into, right? So if you want to be president, if you want any particular power, whatever your long-term goal is, if it's to protect the president, there could be vast area of goals, but whatever it is, that's your long-term strategy. Short-term strategy is everything limited to the very session, right? So putting down or framing other delegates, solving the crisis, worsening the crisis, everything comes under short-term strategy. So ensure that you keep a balance between your short-term strategy. So ensure that you keep a balance between your short-term and long-term strategies. There are a few things that I want you to keep in mind. Uh, Short-term goals are important, but when you're sending out directives, also think of how you can use a particular crisis for your long-term strategy, right? So if you will allow me, one thing that you can consider is just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Right. So if you think about long-term strategy versus short-term strategy, the first thing that you need to ensure is what ideally do you think you can make the most out of. Uh, if there's a session particularly that you don't feel that you should be solving, then use it to enhance your long-term goal. If you, for example, you're talking with the British or the Americans of a possible coup, and you think that the crisis will further allow you to sell your position or further get closer with the British or Americans, then just do that through your private directive. There's no particular need to also be attempting to solve the crisis. I mean, you should ideally send a few directives, but then you can use that particular crisis to enhance your long-term strategy. And short term entails ensure thinking of whether you want to take down a particular personality if they're doing pretty well, or you want to solve the crisis, you want to worsen it. That all comes under the ambit of short term versus long term, right? So now let's talk about decisions that you need to make in a crisis committee. The first decision that you need to do is, whenever a crisis is announced, is do you want to solve or attack? A solve is ideally important because you need to get in. So if the chair is a particular personality, for example, a president or a military leader, then by solving the crisis, you're ideally uh, gaining prestige in their eyes, right? So you need to solve some crisis as well, but then you can also attack it uh, by probably framing other delegates, being aggressive in your directives, right? So worsening the directives, plotting and framing other people, ensuring that, and if sabotaging other people's work or other people's directives. So all of that comes under attack. So a great crisis delegate would always keep a balance and ideally know when they want to attack or defend. Uh, like I said previously, another decision is that if you want to completely ignore the crisis and work towards solving your end game, using, if you think that this crisis is perfect to enhancing your long-term strategy, and you feel free to do that as well. Don't do that in every session because then that's just losing. But if there's a one particular crisis session that you feel is ideal for you to take your game to the next level, then definitely go for it. Uh, yeah. So joint private directives are also very important. You need to make sure which time is the best to send out joint private directives. Uh, which people do you want to work with, which people do you think are, so there's a lot of strategies. The one strategy that you could use is probably, if you feel this person is doing the best, then start working with them to take down others. So in the end, if everyone else has been taken down, and that could be in a variety of ways, framing them, assassinating them, whatever you feel like, uh, then there's just two people remaining, and then you can start, and even in that, the way you're framing others, you can probably put down some things that in the end will come up to bite up your competition. So there's a lot of ways you can do, but joint private directives are probably 30 or 40% of your creative ability to make use and further your position. Now, there's one golden rule that I always follow when it comes to crisis committees. Whenever there's a new crisis, I ensure that the first idea that comes into my mind, just throw it out. It's always the worst one. It's always the most basic one, and it's always the idea that will come in every person's mind, whoever is given the personality, right? So the best idea that you should pen down on your directive is the one that makes you feel excited. It should not make you feel like, maybe we could do this. No, if it makes you feel that, right, this is the one, then go for it. And even if you don't get it, like, it's always possible that you're not the committee is too intense, there's a lot of pressure, then it's always better to still take some time and think about what you want to send out. So I've in this slide, I've given you guys some basic rules that you can follow. These are some of, always remember to question constantly when you're in this cabinet, when you're in a crisis committee. Whenever you get a new crisis, break it down and constantly question who are the stakeholders, who can you play around with, what potential actions, which action benefits you most. This is another one that I usually think: which action is in the best interest of the cabinet? Do you want to take it, or do you want to go completely? You want to completely oppose it? So always, there are several questions that I've written down. These always help me in deciding and choosing between my private directives, and they also help a lot to build up ideas in your mind. So always start with a very basic idea. For example, can I hit two birds with one stone? So if I'm framing two people, right? So how will I frame these two people? If I'm trying to frame these people in this way, right? So what other things do I need to use? How can I use the crisis at hand? So this is how you build up your thought process, for example. Uh, right. So let's start with the common mistakes. I'll end it with this. Number one, don't get overexcited. I know all of us are very, very keen and love crisis committees, but if there's a very clever idea that comes in your mind, or if you feel that you've just executed a very good move, smiling just gives up your entire position. And when you get overexcited, you start making blunders up, right? So one, I will give you my the biggest lesson that I've learned is that I was doing very well in a crisis committee, and one of the biggest and I got very excited because I was moving towards executing my end game. Probably everything was done, and I ended up making a blunder of sending my army in the south when the people I had plotted with were in the north. So my entire army was decimated, and uh, I wasn't able to execute my end game. As simple as simple mistakes as this can end up costing you big time. So always never get overexcited. Uh, don't overcomplicate or send unrealistic directives. I cannot emphasize more on this. People tend to send 5 pages long directives. They don't help, right? So just basic, structured, step by step. For example, I'll tell you. Uh, for as I gave you an example, I'll connect these 2 points. Make sure to not mess up any advances you've made, right? So number one is don't overstate your powers. If you have one thing, or if for don't go from A directly to Z, right? So go from, just build up A, B, like one by one by one, and then end up structuring it. The crisis staff already knows, right? So if they're reading your directives, then they already know what you're doing step by step, and it's much more likely for them to pass it if your directives seem pragmatic and real. If and connecting this to the third mistake, to not mess up any advances, I'll give you a very basic example. For example, that you have made your spy has been able to breach into the US military camp. Good. So you've made that work. And let's say that there are a few steps behind making that work. But as soon as the crisis staff tells you that, sure, you have succeeded in doing this, you end up saying that now I want to execute the US commander in that camp. That is absurdly unrealistic. And you've just messed up everything that you have achieved through your previous directives. If you want to execute the US commander, a good thing would be to further lay out the plan. I would ideally send out directives finding out where the US commander is, what's his security profile, what's his routine, when he's the weakest, when he's the most open, and then probably set out an exact plan for assassinating him. Right. So this would probably require 2 or 3 directives, but then the crisis staff would be like, yeah, the quality of the directives is good. They're structured. They're well laid out. This can probably happen in the real world as well, if we were to look at it. So the chances of it passing are much more higher. Uh, there are 2 things. Now, this is generally for everyone. There is a general rule that in crisis committees, and this is what we are almost everyone's taught, that keep your one finger on the pen and keep your other hand raised up to speak, right? So you're writing with one hand, you're raising a placard with the other. I think that's very counterproductive because number one, if you're giving empty speeches, then that's just bad. And if you're sending out empty directives that are being rejected constantly, it, number one, shows that you're not very good at writing directives, and number two, it just increases pressure on you because your directives are constantly being rejected. I would ideally say that take at least 1 or 2 minutes to, if you feel that the committee is becoming too intense, take a breather, think of the ways probably the questions I gave you in the previous slides, and just go through your strategy much more clearly. There's no pressure on you to, the quantity should be there, but there's no forceful rule that the quantity should be there, but your quality is completely sacrificed. So make sure, and the second rule, that when you are under pressure or you're being tested, so I'm particularly, this is, so when you're under pressure being tested by another delegate, right? So they're trying to frame you, or you're being tested by the crisis staff. This is very crucial because at this point, the committee director and the crisis staff are not expecting you to send 10 or 9 directives and to give very, very good speeches, 5 or 6 good speeches. No, they want you to get out of the situation, and it could very well be done with one particular directive. So rather than like sending 10 directives and not thinking, what I would suggest is just taking 5 minutes thinking and then getting out of that situation, because at that moment they just probably want 1 or 2 good directives that will save your situation, or and probably 1 or 2 good speeches that will completely get you cleared and take the burden off you. So never get overhauled or feel that everything's going against you, because in the end, everyone is probably your equal. You're all delegates of the same academic background, same or close to same ages. So there's not too much pressure. And even if you mess up one crisis, I've seen people win awards who have messed up 2 days and then they've done very well on the other 2 days. There's always room to pick up. So I understand that a lot of people feel down when they mess up in a one particular session, but I think that's a very absurd. There's a very absurd mistake to make, because there's always room to improve. So this is pretty much the end of this video. I hope you liked it. I hope that you continue doing crises and you enjoy them. I thoroughly enjoy them myself. And if you have any questions, please feel free to comment below. This is it from me. I will hopefully see you guys again. Allah Hafiz. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.